pause for just a moment and remain fully present with me, because what you are about to hear is not the kind of message that simply enters your mind and then disappears. This is meant for the person carrying something they cannot quite explain, something they struggle to place into ordinary words. It is for the person who continues finding their thoughts returning to someone long after common sense has told them they should have already moved forward. Yet somehow, the feeling remains quiet and persistent, almost like something still glowing beneath the surface, even when no visible flame can be seen. And here is what makes it so unusual. It does not always arrive with overwhelming intensity. It does not always make a dramatic entrance. Sometimes it is nothing more than a thought appearing without warning, a subtle movement somewhere inside your chest, a strange awareness that someone may still feel connected to you, even through silence, even across distance, even when absolutely nothing is being spoken between the two of you. There is a reason this feeling continues returning. Someone is holding something meaningful and powerful for you, something they may not even be completely prepared to acknowledge or name, perhaps not even privately within their own thoughts. But the connection itself feels restrained in some way, almost as if it is trying to move forward while constantly meeting resistance. And that tension changes the entire situation, because when a connection carries the feeling of something that should be impossible, it does not necessarily become weaker. Sometimes the opposite happens. It grows stronger inside the two people experiencing it. So stay with me here, because what exists beneath the distance, the confusing signals, the pauses, and the strange persistence of this connection is much more layered than it appears from the outside. And if any part of this feels as though it is describing your situation almost too accurately, do not dismiss that feeling too quickly. There is someone in your world who does not experience ordinary emotions toward you, not lightly, not casually, not as something that appears one day and disappears a few days later. What they feel carries more depth than that. It moves quietly, consistently, and with far more emotional weight than they are comfortable holding or admitting. At the beginning, you may have been nothing more than another person somewhere in the background of their life. Then, gradually, you became someone they noticed, then someone they respected, then someone they trusted, perhaps without even consciously deciding to trust you. And somewhere during that progression, before they had enough time to understand what was happening, you became someone their mind kept returning to. That is what makes this connection so complicated. It was not created from convenience. It was not born from boredom or temporary curiosity. It came from recognition, from something within you touching something within them that they may not have realized was waiting to be seen. And that is exactly why the energy between you can still feel so charged even now. What stands between you and the movement you might naturally expect from feelings like these is not necessarily a lack of emotion. It may be circumstance, it may be timing, it may be responsibility, it may be fear. It may come from personal history, existing commitments, family expectations, social pressure, or simply the heavy consequences that can follow when someone decides to act on what their heart has been quietly telling them. These are the kinds of forces that can make a person hesitate, even when internally they already know which direction their feelings are pointing. If the energy between you has felt undeniably strong, while the actual movement has felt almost completely frozen, understand that this does not automatically mean the person cares too little. Sometimes it happens because they care in a way that genuinely scares them. One honest step forward could force them to change far more of their life than they currently feel capable of changing. They may understand that once they admit what they feel, they cannot easily return to pretending they feel nothing. And that realization alone can make someone choose distance, even when everything inside them is pulling toward closeness. What you need to recognize first is that this person may not actually be in conflict with you. They are in conflict with themselves. They wake up in the morning with you already occupying some small corner of their awareness, and almost immediately, they begin trying to push that awareness back down. They replay small moments between you. They remember things you said that seemed insignificant at the time. They recall your expressions, your presence, the particular feeling of being understood or genuinely seen by you. And then they pull away from those memories, because allowing themselves to want you feels like a challenge to the structure they have created around their life. For some people, that structure includes existing emotional commitments. For others, it may be shaped by family expectations, cultural pressure, personal principles, responsibilities, or a carefully constructed idea of what their future is supposed to look like. They may have committed themselves to a particular version of life long before they understood what that commitment would eventually cost them emotionally. And now this connection has arrived at exactly the wrong time, or perhaps the exact time when they can no longer ignore certain truths about themselves. The deeper problem is often not that they do not want the connection. The deeper problem is that the connection forces them to look at parts of their life that no longer feel completely honest. It holds up a mirror, and what they see in that mirror may be uncomfortable. It may reveal desires they have buried, choices they have questioned, or emotional needs they have spent years convincing themselves they could live without. So they become quiet. They keep everything inside. They watch instead of speaking. They retreat precisely when their natural instinct is to move closer, and silence from the outside can be incredibly misleading. Silence can look like peace. It can resemble indifference. It can appear as though someone has completely moved on and no longer cares. But silence is very often not emptiness. Sometimes silence is overflow. Sometimes it is what happens when someone is carrying more emotion than they believe they can safely express, and they have nowhere appropriate to place it. If this person appears controlled, composed, or unaffected, do not automatically interpret that as proof that nothing is happening inside them. What looks like stillness on the surface can be hiding something much more turbulent underneath. This is where the tension begins to build upon itself. Because the more someone tries to suppress what they feel, the more concentrated that emotion can become, rather than simply disappearing. Restrained emotion does not always fade peacefully with time. Sometimes it becomes denser. Sometimes it becomes stronger, precisely because it has no healthy outlet. Every time they stop themselves from reaching out, the connection does not necessarily become weaker. Instead, the feeling can sink deeper into them. Every time they choose restraint instead of honesty, internal pressure can increase. Every time they act indifferent while feeling something completely different inside, the truth underneath can become harder to ignore. This may explain why you have experienced such strange emotional waves with this person. There may have been moments when they seemed emotionally close, even though neither of you was saying anything. Moments when they appeared distant, but somehow remained present in your awareness in a way you could not clearly define. Moments when you suddenly found yourself thinking about them without an obvious trigger, without seeing something that reminded you of them, without intentionally searching for memories of them. There can be a lingering sensation that something between you remains unfinished. What has not been spoken, acknowledged, or fully faced tends to continue moving beneath the surface. It can influence moods, it can affect timing, it can create an ongoing sense that something remains in motion even while everything appears completely still. And from their side, this internal conflict can be genuinely exhausting. They may appear stable to everyone else. They may seem dependable, focused, disciplined, and completely in control. Yet privately, they can be caught in a constant negotiation between what they feel and what they believe they are permitted to feel, between what feels emotionally true and what seems practically safe, between honesty and consequence. If this connection has ever felt unusually heavy to carry, there may be a reason for that. It is not simply attraction. It is not merely chemistry. It carries pressure. It carries possibility. It carries the awareness that if either person makes one sincere move, something real may have to change. And change is exactly what this person may be working desperately to avoid. They may not fear the connection itself as much as they fear everything the connection could force them to confront. This is also why time and physical distance may not have created the relief you expected. Usually, if a connection is shallow, time gradually weakens it. If it was only chemistry or the excitement of something new, eventually the novelty runs out and the emotional charge fades. If it was simply curiosity, the mind eventually finds something else to focus on. But that does not seem to be what happened here. The thought keeps returning in one form or another. The emotional imprint remains. The connection continues appearing in memories, quiet moments, unexpected thoughts, and emotional reactions, because it is not necessarily being sustained by habit or routine. It may be sustained by something that felt emotionally real. Something inside both of you shifted when this connection began. You may have experienced it as an unusual familiarity, as ease, as comfort, or as a strange sense that you understood each other without needing complete sentences. There may have been conversations that felt deeper than they logically should have been. There may have been silences that somehow communicated more than words. You may have noticed the way they looked at you, the way their energy changed around you, or the way certain moments seemed to carry more emotional meaning than either of you openly acknowledged. And perhaps that is why moving forward has not felt as simple as it should. You can tell yourself that enough time has passed. You can tell yourself that distance should have erased the feeling. You can remind yourself of every practical reason why the connection should no longer matter. Yet some part of you still recognizes something unfinished. And if they have been fighting their own feelings, then they may be experiencing the same contradiction from the opposite side. They may be telling themselves to let go, while another part of them keeps remembering exactly why letting go has never been as easy as they expected. Sometimes a person does not walk away because they feel nothing. Sometimes they step back because they feel too much and do not yet know what to do with it. Sometimes the greatest distance is created not by lack of love, interest, or emotional attachment, but by fear of what honesty would require from them. They may be protecting their current life, protecting other people, protecting their reputation, protecting their sense of control, or even protecting themselves from the vulnerability that comes with admitting that another person has reached them more deeply than they intended. So if you have been wondering why the connection still feels alive despite the silence, remember this. Not every quiet connection is a dead connection. Some things become quieter because they are being contained. Some feelings disappear from conversation, but remain active in the mind. Some people create distance not because the bond means nothing, but because acknowledging what it means would require them to make decisions they are not prepared to make. And that is where this story becomes even more significant. Because the question is no longer simply whether they feel something. The deeper question is what they will eventually do with what they feel. Emotion by itself does not create movement. Recognition does not automatically create courage. A person can deeply care and still remain silent. They can miss someone and still refuse to reach out. They can think about someone every day and still convince themselves that distance is the safer choice. But suppressed truth has a way of demanding attention eventually. The more someone attempts to bury an emotionally meaningful connection, the more difficult it can become to maintain the appearance that nothing happened. Memories return. Comparisons begin. Ordinary moments suddenly remind them of what they experienced with you, and slowly, they may begin realizing that what they tried to dismiss was never as temporary as they wanted it to be. That is why you should not measure the meaning of this connection only by what is happening externally right now. External silence tells you what someone is doing. It does not always tell you what they are experiencing internally. The absence of action can be real, while the presence of emotion is also real. Both things can exist at the same time. And perhaps the most important part for you is understanding that you do not have to force an answer out of them. You do not have to chase clarity from someone who is still struggling to become clear with themselves. You do not have to carry the entire emotional weight of a connection simply because you can feel that something remains unresolved. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back, remain grounded, and allow the truth of the situation to reveal itself through time and consistent actions rather than through guesses, anxiety, or endless interpretation. Because if what exists between two people is truly meaningful, it will eventually require some form of honesty. And when that moment comes, what matters will not be the intensity of what was felt in silence. What will matter is whether someone is finally willing to acknowledge it, take responsibility for it, and make choices that match the truth they have been carrying inside. Until then, remember that silence does not automatically equal forgetting. Distance does not automatically equal detachment, and restraint does not always mean the feeling is gone. Sometimes the quietest connections are the ones carrying the most internal conflict. And sometimes what appears to be an ending from the outside is actually a person standing at the edge of a truth they are still gathering the courage to face. Something that registered in the body before the mind had the chance to analyze it. They experienced that same sensation, and that is why this does not behave like ordinary attraction. It does not disappear simply because logic says it should. It does not become weaker just because the circumstances are inconvenient. It keeps coming back because something underneath it remains unfinished. What many people fail to recognize is this: the longing itself is not the complete story. Beneath that longing is something even more meaningful. You awaken something inside them that had been quietly dormant for a long time. They reflected something in you that had been waiting to be seen and understood. So yes, the desire matters. But deeper than the desire is an awakening, a truth that continues pushing its way toward the surface. That is why dismissing this connection can feel so difficult for both of you. They may continue moving through their everyday life, appearing completely normal, going to work, spending time with the people who rely on them, fulfilling responsibilities, and doing everything their current life requires. But their mind keeps circling back. Their heart keeps returning to whatever made it feel alive. They remember how effortless certain things felt when they were with you, how understood they felt without needing to explain every part of themselves. They remember tiny moments that should not have meant very much, yet somehow stayed with them. And that is precisely what disturbs them, because once a person has been truly seen at that level, it becomes difficult to return completely to shallow forms of connection and convince themselves that those connections are enough. This is the hidden cost of choosing to suppress what you feel. What gets pushed down does not simply vanish. It finds another way to appear. It can emerge as restlessness, as a strange emotional distance from people and places that once felt familiar, as a quiet dissatisfaction with decisions that previously seemed stable, as questions that were never there before. Why does something suddenly feel so restrictive? Why does a life that appears right from the outside no longer feel right from within? Why does a certain emptiness continue appearing in places that once seemed full? And whether they speak your name openly or never mention you at all, you become connected to those questions. You become a quiet comparison between the life they are currently living and the truth they have experienced. If you have ever questioned whether this connection changed them somehow, the answer is yes. Perhaps quietly, perhaps in ways no one else can see, but genuinely, it changed what they are able to comfortably accept. It changed what they can sincerely ignore. It changed their understanding of what feels real. And changes of that depth rarely disappear completely. You are changing too. That is the second layer of what this experience is creating. This connection has not only been drawing something out of them, it has also been awakening something within you. Since this person entered your life, you may have noticed that your tolerance for certain things has gradually decreased. What once felt like enough may now feel strangely empty. What once appeared to be meaningful connection may now look more like surface-level contact. What once seemed like affection may now feel like only a faint version of what affection can actually be. You are becoming more aware of what genuine emotional depth feels like, and once that awareness develops, settling for less becomes much more difficult. That is part of why letting go of this has felt so complicated. It is not simply about the person. It is also about everything the connection revealed to you. It showed you what your heart is capable of experiencing. It showed you the difference between receiving attention and being genuinely recognized. It helped you understand what truly nourishes you emotionally. Not every intense connection enters your life with the immediate purpose of becoming a relationship. Some connections arrive first to transform something within you. They sharpen your awareness, they raise your standards, they make you less willing to compromise away the things that truly matter simply because you are afraid of losing someone. So if you have found yourself caught somewhere between longing and personal growth, understand this clearly. The purpose of this connection is not to make you put your life on pause. It is to make your life more truthful, more conscious, and more aligned with what you genuinely need instead of what you have previously convinced yourself to accept. There is a reason this connection can feel both sacred and deeply unsettling at the same time. It does not only carry desire, it carries truth. And truth can feel threatening to someone who has spent years building a life around responsibilities, roles, expectations, and the version of themselves that everyone else has become accustomed to seeing. You did not create the uncertainty inside their world. You simply brought attention to what was already beginning to weaken. Your presence revealed what had already been uncertain beneath the surface. That is why the push and pull continues. That is why moments of warmth can be followed almost immediately by withdrawal. It is not necessarily because they are unaware of what they feel. It is because recognizing what they feel creates its own kind of pressure. The pressure to choose, the pressure to become honest, the pressure to allow their current life to change direction. Many people are simply not ready for that kind of clarity when it arrives, so they rationalize it. They call it temporary. They tell themselves it is only a phase. They attempt to wait until the feeling disappears, or they try to think their way out of it. But deep connections rarely disappear simply because someone neglects them. Instead, they often transform into internal pressure. They become something a person continues encountering during their most private and honest moments. It appears in the silence before sleep, in the empty space between the life that appears perfectly fine and the inner feeling that something is missing. It appears when everything is quiet enough for the truth to become impossible to avoid. If this feels familiar to you, then listen carefully here, because this is where your own role becomes extremely important. Your purpose in this experience is not to take their fear onto yourself and carry it for them. Your purpose is not to spend every ounce of your energy analyzing every silence, every message, every pause, and every change in behavior until you finally receive certainty. Your responsibility is to remain truthful with yourself, while whatever truth exists continues unfolding through both of your lives, in whatever form it eventually takes. That is where your personal power begins returning to you. Because one of the most quietly harmful parts of a connection like this is not the longing itself. It is the way longing can slowly pull you away from your own center. It can transform you into someone who constantly watches for signs instead of actually living. Someone who studies every small signal instead of trusting their own reality. Someone who keeps emotional space permanently reserved for potential, while reality continues giving you uncertainty. But something inside you is already beginning to shift. You are starting to understand that feeling deeply does not mean you are required to wait forever. You are beginning to recognize that real love does not require you to abandon yourself just to keep a connection alive. You are learning that intensity is not the same as readiness. You are learning that mystery is not automatically compatibility. You are learning that a powerful emotional bond can be meaningful without becoming an excuse to neglect your own needs.